want to get into a subject tonight that I actually have had a number of conversations with my friends in the industry, manufacturers, and some of whom we don't represent, but we go back a long time with them. And it's the topic called dynamic range. And in a nutshell, dynamic range is the differential between the loudest and the softest passage, that spread. And many people had their first experiences with some of the electronic widgets used in the music industry years ago when they would listen to FM radio. And at first, nobody was using what are known as compressors, which crush the dynamic range. It first showed up in FM radio because what people discovered was that people would stop on the radio dial to the loudest station. And so if your station happened to be quiet for a moment, someone spinning the dial might just simply slide past you and onto somebody else, which would affect the the listenership, and of course their advertising revenue based upon how many people listen to them. So what started happening was the use of compressors. Sorry about my sitting down tonight, but my legs are just tired. I've been on my feet 12 hours today. And so the other way people would refer to it as just simply compression. Now, the use of compressors to create this, in other words, to take what might be, 90 dB and, crush it down to 45. Part of the other consequence of doing this is kind of like taking, a 3D item and running a steamroller over it. You wind up smearing everything out every which way. And certainly rhythm, pitch, and emotion go right into the ash can. But you do have it loud because once they crush it down to a smaller range, then what they can do is increase essentially the gain, and so you have a much higher presence on the scale of things because you're always out here at the top end of what you were able to transmit. You were remaining within the modulation range as opposed to overmodulating. And anybody who's heard overmodulation, it's very distorted. So there are devices to deal with that, but we're not going to get into that tonight. So you first heard it in radios. My first experience in trying to deal with compression on radio was actually a local radio station here, WGUC. And at that point, they were running a 2-to-1 compression ratio. Many commercial rock stations might be running 4-to-1 to 5-to-1. So there was, very little dynamic range to the music, but it was louder than shit. And I got WGUC to turn off their compression. Now, WGUC is a classical radio station, and it's almost the antithesis of having a musical performance that have triple, pianissimo to triple fortissimo. I mean, now you're just crushing it all into something. So they turned their compression off, and they were extremely happy with the musical performance of what they were broadcasting. However, it only lasted for about 60 days because a lot of people started calling into WGUC complaining about the fact that in the really soft passages, they would turn their little desk radio up at work, and then if suddenly you started having a fortissimo or very loud, next thing you know, it's broadcasting through the whole office and people get pissed. So back went on the compression, and that was the end of that. So while this originally was in the world of FM, unfortunately, this electronic sludge has now found its way into a lot of current rock and roll. And so there's very little dynamic range to the music. It's just blaringly loud all the time, which kind of makes one of the speakers most known for dynamic range pointless, which is Klipsch. Because with horn drivers, they're capable of tremendous dynamic range. Well, if everything sounds like it's, a blaring horn all the time, what's the difference? You can get any speaker to do that. So speaker manufacturers in particular started becoming very concerned about this phenomenon. My good friend of many years, Wendell Diller, over at Magnapan, we had a conversation about this such that that type of use of compression and very limited, maybe only 20 dB of dynamic range left, made buying quality audio equipment, be it speakers or anything else, rather pointless, because you would get essentially the same musical performance out of a sharp boombox, because the music is all smeared anyway, and there's no really difference between loud and soft. Now, this is why when you go out and you're trying to select equipment, you have to be somewhat careful about the music you bring along so that you understand what the qualities of the product and its musical capability are. Now, if you're only into that type of heavily compressed music, well, I really don't have good advice for you on that, because other than buy something cheap, because everything else is going to sound the same anyway. It's just some will have more bass and some will have more treble, but otherwise it's going to be amusical as hell and just loud. Frankly, I'd recommend going to an auto parts store and just buying some car horns. So that, you're going to, because you get essentially the same thing. It's just you don't have any words to it, I guess. But that's the problem now with some of the current rock and roll. I'm not blasting all rock and roll, don't get me wrong. But there are certain groups that they just want to be louder and shit all the time. And this makes getting really good equipment or selecting good equipment difficult. So it's fine if you like that type of music. I'm certainly not going to judge what people like or don't like. Historically, the Catholic Church banned Gregorian chant for over 900 years because they thought it was evil. So, there's no rhyme or reason to why people like or dislike music. And but bring along other types of music as well, so you can at least appreciate what the equipment can do. Now, if you're only going to listen to severely compressed music, then buy the cheapest thing you can find, would be my advice, because there's really going to be very little difference. However, if your music has a range of different things, then using heavily compressed music is not going to help you select quality audio products for all the other music you're thinking about. So that's where the dynamic range comes in. And the minute these little beasts get involved in the music production, its goal is to be loud and annoying, but it's not about musical performance. I don't know, maybe I should do a recording of garbage trucks compressing, crash and compress it and sell it, because it probably sounds about the same. It's ruining the talent that may be there in those bands, because you don't get to hear it. You don't get to hear their musicianship. It's just louder than hell. So I'm not boning with, the musicians themselves, but I do have a real bone to pick with the recording engineers and what they're doing to the music these people are trying to perform. So this is one to watch out for. And it's, as I said, a number of speaker manufacturers are deeply concerned about it. Hell, why even buy an audio system? Just get a pair of earpods and listen to it on your phone. It'll be about the same. You save all the money, so don't even buy anything. But that's, I guess, what it's trying to appeal to is people who want to have little personal stuff, and which is fine. I have personal things. But there's no way of distinguishing the quality you hear from a phone from a good audio system if the music is heavily compressed, other than the volume you can produce and annoy other people in the room. And that's pretty much it. So choose your music wisely when you go out to choose, select your equipment. Have a range of things. Certainly invite the shop to play types of music you don't listen to, so that it'll be fresh. You can evaluate it for its musicianship, and don't have them pull out, the classic audiophile recordings. I mean, I have a catalog, a book here, and I let people choose what music they want to listen to, and I've studied it with about a dozen or two of the audiophile recordings, and if that's all they pick out, I know I'm in for a really long day, because they're not really listening to new music and judging it musically. They're listening, they're trying to evaluate an old wine in a new bottle. There's nothing I can do with that. Well, this should sound like that when I heard it on this. I mean, as I've done in other videos, you have no idea what they even use for microphones to even begin to evaluate what it should sound like. That's an unverifiable, but whatever. So that's my take on dynamic range. And yeah, it's a real bane right now to us trying to sell good audio equipment, because when people bring in some of this crap, it's pointless for us to play good equipment.